Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. As the Minister responsible for Fire and Emergency Services Newfoundland and Labrador, I am pleased to inform the public that the legislation being introduced today is the next step towards establishing a province-wide service that expands basic 911 to all residents of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Emergency 911 Act enables us to establish a governing body for the service, appoint a board of directors, and finalize arrangements with telecommunications providers and 911 call-taking services, also known as public safety answering points. With the ongoing work of our 911 implementation team, we are on track to launch this service by the end of this year, so that all residents of this province will have access to this internationally recognized emergency telephone number on both landlines and cell phones. As many of you are aware, the purpose of the Basic 911 service is to facilitate the contact of emergency services by residents and businesses. The 911 service model will incorporate a call-taking service in which the call taker will facilitate the call to the appropriate emergency responder, whether that's the police, a fire department, or an ambulance. The dispatching of services will be carried out by the respective emergency service provider and is consistent with practices in the maritime provinces. 911 is currently available in 3 areas of the province by landline and covers approximately 40% of the province's population. Residents in the Northeast Avalon region, Corner Brook Bay of Islands, and Labrador West region already have access to basic 911 via landline. Additionally, all residents of Newfoundland and Labrador can currently access 911 from a cell phone where cellular signals are available. Once this bill is passed in the House of Assembly, it will provide the legislative framework for the establishment, operation, and long-term enhancement of a province-wide basic 911 telephone service, including the rollout of next-generation 911. There are 3 key parts to this bill. Part 1 establishes the emergency 911 telephone service and requires participation by every municipality, emergency service provider, and public safety answering point, which is also known as the 911 call center. The bill also provides for the Lieutenant Governor and Council to determine the location and boundaries of the primary public safety answering points and calls for emergency service providers, such as fire departments, ambulances, and police forces, to identify emergency response zones. The identification of these zones will enable the 911 implementation team to accurately define geographical boundaries of the responsible emergency providers, which will then be incorporated into the technology used at the public safety answering points. Part 2 of the bill establishes the Newfoundland and Labrador 911 Bureau Incorporated, which will operate as a not-for-profit corporation. In keeping with policy direction to establish an entity at arm's length from government, the Newfoundland and Labrador 911 Bureau will own its property, be responsible for its own staff, and liable for its contracts. It is also charged with establishing and operating an emergency 911 telephone service in a manner that is efficient and cost-effective. This service will be flexible, responding to changing technologies, while also protecting the confidentiality and security of the information that it's required to collect. The Emergency 911 Bill also facilitates the creation of a board of directors for the Newfoundland and Labrador 911 Bureau, to be appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. The Board of Directors will consist of a maximum of 9 individuals, including the Director of the Bureau, a representative from municipalities Newfoundland and Labrador, a representative from each primary public safety answering point, and at least 1 member who is a resident of Labrador. In order to fund the service, the bill provides authority for the Lieutenant Governor and Council to establish a fee, which will be charged to subscribers of wireless and landline telephone service. This fee, applied on a cost recovery basis, will fund the 911 emergency telephone service and cover the administrative costs of the telecommunication service provider. The bill also establishes the Newfoundland and Labrador 911 Service Fund, into which the levy fees will be deposited for the Newfoundland and Labrador 911 Bureau to use on a not-for-profit basis. Funds will be used for developing, operating, and improving the emergency 911 telephone service. Once established, the Bureau is mandated to ensure the confidentiality and security of information provided to it by the telecommunication service provider. Liability protection will be provided to the individuals that provide the emergency 911 telephone service when acting in good faith. Municipalities and other stakeholders have an essential role to play in implementing the new service across Newfoundland and Labrador, and they have had an opportunity to be directly involved in identifying their emergency response zones through consultations with the 911 implementation team, who have recently traveled throughout the province to conduct these meetings. Should a council that has an established fire department be unwilling or unable to identify its emergency response zone, the bill makes a provision for an amendment to the Fire Protection Services Act that allows the Fire Commissioner to determine the zones. It's important to note that while this initiative will not improve emergency response times on its own, government has made many investments to improve response capabilities for fire and emergency services. With so many important investments being made in support of our fire and emergency service capabilities, the passing of the Emergency 911 bill is the next logical step. Having basic 911 coverage for all landline telephones in the province will also provide the groundwork needed for next generation 911, which will allow emergency services to keep pace with changing methods of communication and data transfer, such as text messaging and image sharing. Once the bill has passed and the implementation work has been completed, basic 911 services will be available to all those who have landlines and also to those with mobile phones where a cellular telephone signal is available. I'm certainly very pleased to be part of this significant legislation that will ultimately improve the safety of all residents, for all residents and visitors of Newfoundland and Labrador.